Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor, and we start with, well, more investigation into the 2020 presidential election. What? Yeah, actually, that's the case. The Supreme Court, it looks like, is on the verge of actually looking at one of the complaints with regard to how that election was conducted. Joining us now is Jon Solomon from Just the News. He's got that and a couple of other stories we're going to get to. But Jon, thanks for joining us as always.
Yeah, great to be with you.
So, I mean, justice delayed here, but what exactly is the Supreme Court going to look at with the 2020 election?
Well, there's been this litigation that's been pending for quite some time now. It's worked its way through the courts, been turned down at most levels. There are several government officials that had a fiduciary responsibility, including Vice President Mike Pence and others, to look at these allegations more seriously before they certified the election results. Now, this was on the docket about a month ago, 6 weeks ago, to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court chose not to take this case, not to grant certiorari for it. And then unexpectedly, it showed back up on the docket for this Friday's decision-making conference that the justices have behind the scenes. It's not a public event, but there's a new argument that's been added to it. We don't know exactly what that is, but for some reason, the justices said, we're going to take a second look at this, even though we just rejected it 6-7 weeks ago. An unusual moment may mean nothing. They may reject it again, but if they were to take it, there would be a pretty significant whiplash here in Washington, because a lot of people think, well, we finally put 2020 to bed. Certainly the Democrats want to put 2020 to bed. This would peel open a big Band-Aid and maybe open a whole new debate in this country.
Now, let's be clear. I have taken a quick look at it, and you probably have more details than I do, Jon. That's why you're here, by the way. I don't see anything here that would actually result in some sort of reversal or recount or overturning. This really has to do, and so that makes sense that the Supreme Court would look at something like this, because this is about, whose role is appropriate, what are the constitutional duties, and again, I mean, my whole focus on all of this in 2020, post-2020, has been we can't go through this again. The American people need to feel confident with the process. This could help reinforce what the process is supposed to be, yeah?
Yeah, listen, the Democrats particularly have tried to say, listen, the certification of votes is solely a ministerial duty. You can't object. You can't raise questions. It's just a process. You have to follow the process. Some people who read the Constitution and go back and look at the Founding Fathers' intent when they set up all these things said, no, wait a second. There should be a debate if there's concern. That's what this lawsuit is about.
Yeah. And that's what was really frustrating. When you've got people like Ted Cruz, who I think Alan Dershowitz said he was the smartest student he ever had at Harvard Law. Yeah. Ted Cruz is raising objections. Mark Levin is raising objections. Again, not about voting machines and not about, people in Venezuela controlling our elections, but constitutional roles and what the process is supposed to be. I feel like we were all being gaslit, Jon, by saying, oh, you guys are deniers. No, we're not deniers. We just want to know what the process is supposed to be so that we don't feel uneasy about the system of elections that we have in this country. So who do you think is sort of on the court sort of saying, yes, this is a legitimate thing that needs to be addressed?
I think there's been some signals from earlier cases that Clarence Thomas and Justice Alito would like to at least look at some of the constitutional issues, not reverse the election, not call a do-over, but just simply, hey, we may run into this sometime in the future. Let's have some clarity on it. I don't know if this will be what the outcome is, but it's certainly interesting that they've gotten 2 cracks at this case over really less than a 2-month period. Yeah. Suggests there's something going on behind the courts that we might not be able to see.
Fascinating. All right, now there's a theme here because people in this country need to feel a certain level of confidence in our systems, our institutions. We need to feel confident in how we conduct our elections. We have to feel confidence in our FBI, the investigative and enforcement arm of the Justice Department. And we have yet another story that you're covering here at Just the News, where it seems like their organization and their direction in who they're investigating and what they're investigating about is colored by politics.
Such a great way of setting that up. That's really what this issue is about. And think about this. I've been covering this town for about 35 years. I've never seen 25 whistleblowers come out of any agency. You got 24 whistleblowers coming out of the FBI. One of them is being interviewed right as we speak in the Senate Judiciary Committee today. Steve Friend, he's a guy that's probably going to lose his job over blowing the whistle on January 6th. But there's a recurring theme. And what I tried to do the last few days is pull back a little bit and walk through when the FBI suffered some of its biggest black eyes the last few years Is there a commonality to what happened? And the answer is yes. Let's go through the failures. Well, one of them that they had to backtrack on was Russia collusion. Another one they had to backtrack on was investigating parents protesting at school boards and treating them as domestic terrorists. No basis for that. And the third one just happened last week, which is the Richmond office of the FBI put out an intelligence product, a bulletin, saying any Catholic that went to a Latin rites mass, the old mass, the pre-Vatican II mass, might pose a white supremacist extremist threat. Pretty big stretch. What happened in all three of those episodes that are common? Each of the allegations, each of the information that drove the FBI to take action came from an overtly partisan, political, liberal ideology source. Let's go through that. Russia collusion, Democratic campaign, Hillary Clinton. School parents are at risk, came from a left-leaning school board association group. A lot of red states have left that group since then. And the most recent one, it came from the Southern Poverty Law Center, a very far left-leaning group that purports to fight hate speech. 3 times liberals drove the conversation and got the FBI to investigate something, assumably against their political opponents. Former intelligence director of the FBI said, hey, this is a problem. At some point, the FBI ought to realize political groups have a political ideology and a political motive. Stop falling for it. The former intelligence director of the FBI, Kevin Brock, really a very respected former member of the FBI, literally said this was one of the worst intelligence products he had ever seen. He said it read more like a comedy book than an intelligence product.
Yeah. And John, I remember when the Russian collusion story was going on and Robert Mueller became the special investigator. I think it was one of the interviews that I was conducting with you where you said, well, you know, part of the story is the FBI and how they got the information and how they acted on it. And Robert Mueller used to run the FBI. So right there, he's not necessarily the best choice to be the special investigator on this.
Yeah, and listen, we learned in the course of that investigation that earlier in his life, he relied on a Russian oligarch to help the FBI go search for one of its missing members. So he had his own Russia collusion problem. One of the things that I think people are now saying, when you listen to the sum total of the whistleblowers, and I think you're onto something, Larry, with what you just said, it's the mindset change that started with Robert Mueller, accelerated with James Comey, and is blown up with Chris Wray, which is we're going to bring in, instead of the type of guys that go through the academy, the type of gals that go through the academy, work their ways up and know the diag, the manual of the FBI, you bring in these partisan lawyers that come from the Justice Department, that come from the outside, and intelligence analysts, which they didn't have before 2001, a very large number. And they all are coming from liberal, educated, legal backgrounds, and they bring their ideology with them. And I'll just give you one tiny little thing from that Catholic memo.
Yeah.
The FBI analyst, when he was talking about pregnant women, would not call them mothers. He called them pregnant persons or pregnant people using that liberal ideology.
Wow.
He tips his own ideology in the writing of that memo.
That's a red flag right there on multiple levels, by the way. And I think that's a great point. We always thought of the FBI as, you know, Elliot Ness. These are cops, but they're cops that work for the Justice Department at the federal level. But you're right. They're a bunch of Ivy League lawyers, and they bring that bias with them. And I'll add one other thing, John. When they leave the FBI, then they go, as we've seen, they go to work for Google. They go to work for Facebook. They go to work for Twitter. And we saw exactly what happened with the Hunter Biden laptop story. Same thing, the same political bias, but now even filtering out of the FBI. Great reporting, as always. Jon Solomon, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks, my friend.
Great stuff. JustTheNews.com. That's where you're getting, well, just the news and not news you're getting elsewhere. I'm glad we've got him here on Salem News Channel. And that's what you're watching, Salem News Channel. More to come on O'Connor Tonight.